Hello, I'm Peter Reynolds and this is my companion Ballymac Boris, the greyhound, and my contribution to the Gauge-O Guild virtual show is I'm going to show you how I turn components from the Pico gas lamps into a swan neck gas lamp. As most of you know, I do model the Southern for the SR7mm group. However, I have discovered that these swan neck lamps were not unique to the Southern by any means. Certainly the northeastern region did use them, and all they did was just fit the swan necks to the existing gas posts, or the old oil lamp posts even. So with components out of this kit, so these are the posts. They're made out of plastic. They're quite flexible. We have some 1.5mm tubing. We have some 0.8mm tubing. Now I buy this from the online store Hobbies. You sometimes see their catalogues in places like WH Smith's. So this is 0.8mm outside diameter, 0.6mm inside diameter. I've got some of my very thin wire, which is only 1 or 2mm thick. I believe you can buy this on the well-known online auction site or from the online sales site as well. On top of that, I've got one packet of, well, I've got more than one, but I've got one packet of GL1, which is a Sugg Rochester lamp head in white metal made by S&D Models. These were bought from Invertrain. And I've got my very small 0805 LEDs, which I buy by 100 at a time. They're about 11 pence each. So I'm going to go through this and I will show you how I build a swan neck lamp. Now the first thing that you need to do is to take your posts, and then you have to cut off the supports at the top. So these bits at the top, these need cutting off, and inside there's a little bit of a tag which you may be able to see, but it runs down inside the post. And now you need to make the post hollow, because at some stage you're going to have to drill out the top 1.5mm so this tube will go through. And the purpose of this tube is twofold. It provides the return for the LED, but it also strengthens the post so that if you knock it accidentally, you're not going to snap it off or it's going to bend. So this is the 1.5mm tube. I'll trim these bits and then show you what I've done. Okay, so I've made my post by cutting the supports for the oil lantern off the top, and then using a sharp scalpel, a new blade is advisable for this, cutting off the two tags which are inside. And then after I've done that, I've used progressively a tapered broach from the bottom, gently rotating it so that it just peeks out at the top without pushing the two sides apart. Dress it off with one of my wife's famous nail files, and then progressively drilling it out using 1.3, 1.4 and then a 1.5mm drill in the fingers, or if you have one in a drill, a hand drill, such as this. So whichever way you prefer. I prefer doing it by hand because you get more of a feel of it. What I've used to actually glue the sides together, I'm not quite sure what the plastic is. It may be ABS or something, but rather than use standard solvent like MEC or whatever you prefer, I use GS Hypo clear super glue, which I buy from Hobbycraft. It's in the jewellery section. So once you've done that, you take your bit of 1.5mm tube and then just check that it goes up without pushing the sides apart. So just push it up gently, check that it comes out the top. I need to do a little bit more drilling. It's not quite 1.5. This is very tight because it's designed to have a grain of wheat bulb in it rather than have an alternate top. So there we go. So there's the tube sticking out the top. It has not pushed the sides apart too much. So now that we've done that, we can put that to one side. So put it to one side, let the glue go off completely so that it's nice and solid, and then what we will do is we will turn our attention to what we need to do with the 1.5mm tube. So I said put it to one side, but you do need it again. So work out how long you need the tube to fall below the baseboard, and then at the top you need to have maybe 2 or 3mm protruding above the end of the plastic. So I've got that. I will judge it by eye. I'll use a cutting disc in Dremel. It doesn't have to be super accurate. Don't leave the Dremel on too long or it will melt the plastic post. So there we've got our bit of tubing, and we'll clean the top up. So there's our length of 1.5mm tubing, and that is, like I said, that's the return and the strengthener for the inside of the tube, so that it doesn't break if it suffers from any knocks. So we'll just check it again, and that looks pretty good. So there you have your tube and the internal tube in the plastic bit, and this time I will put it to one side and let the plastic go off, the plastic cement go off. So this is our 0.8mm tubing, and as you can see, it's quite a decent fit, sliding fit. So we've prepared our 1.5mm tubing, which is, as I said, the return conductor for the LED and the strengthening for the plastic post. And this is our 0.8mm outside diameter brass tubing. Now the easiest way to get the swan neck shape is to treat this like it is brass wire, so it will need annealing, but you have to be very careful with this, not to heat it up too long, because it's a tube, it doesn't conduct heat like a bit of wire. So if you leave the flame on it too quickly, you can quite easily melt it. I've done it before, and it just basically spoils it. Luckily it's not too expensive, but it is a bit annoying. So we have our gas burner, on a reasonable heat, and there are two sights for bends. So we will do one sight near the end. So we just made it go pink, and then we'll just do a little bit down the end. Well, you see it bent when I held the tube on, but it looks okay. It's not deformed. So we've annealed our tube, and the next thing that we need to do is we need to cut off a bit, because we don't need the whole length. So we'll cut off about a third of the tube, again using the Dremel with a slitting disc in. Doesn't matter about the end. So, and then smooth it in your fingers so that it's as straight as you can get it. So what we're going to do is we are going to, first thing that we're going to do, actually before we put the wire in it, is that we're going to prepare the lampshade, the Sug Rochester lampshade. So these are white metal parts, and you get the 3 bits to make a gas lamp. We don't actually need the mantle on the end, so we're going to not bother using that. And then we get a vacuum formed plastic part, which is the lampshade. So we'll put that lampshade to one side, and the first thing that we need to do is to prepare the lampshade. So I'll go away and do that and then show you what I've done. Okay, so I've prepared the light fitting, and that is the 2 bits. Again, I've glued them together. What I've done is I've drilled 2 holes, which you can probably just about see. One from the top through the gas pipe fitting. That's 0.8mm to take the tube. Now I usually keep my Dremel pots because they're very useful for putting oil and things like that in. It's quite hard to drill these. If you've got a pillar drill, great, you can get a vertical cut. I don't, so I've just used the normal Dremel on the minimum setting, 0.8mm drill, and I've used a drop of oil on the end of the drill bit, and slowly done it just a little bit at a time. When I feel it's gone in near enough, I start from the other side, so hopefully they meet in the middle, and they have. I've also drilled a 0.4mm hole just behind. On the white metal casting there is a witness mark which is supposed to take the pipe from the gas mantle casting, but as I'm not going to use that, what I've done is I've used it and I've drilled through, and that is for the return. So now we've got our light fitting, which I've glued together, and I'm going to now take the bit of tubing that I have that I've annealed, and I'm going to solder this to the top of the pipe. I'm going to solder the pipe to the top of the light fitting using standard white metal soldering techniques, and the bit that's standing up in which, let's get something to point with. So you can see this bit that's sticking up just below my tweezers here. That is the operating valve. Now I don't normally fit those, but for this one I will. So we're going to solder that. I'll go away and do it, and then I'll show you what I've done again. So there we have the light fitting on the end of the tube, and as I said, just standard white metal soldering, so I've used a bit of 140-degree solder to tin the end of the tube, and 70-degree on top of that. Whatever you do, don't tin all the way to the end of the tube. If you block the tube with solder, which is quite easy to do with capillary attraction, it's the devil's own end to actually get it out again, and the only way realistically that you're going to be able to do that is by cutting the end off and starting again, which again is rather wasteful. So there we have it. So the small bit at the front, the bit sitting off to the side that you can see here, that's the operating valve. What I'll do is I'll clean it up when it's soldered into the 1.5mm tube. But what we're going to do next is we have to put the wire through the tube. The main reason behind this is it stops the tube getting deformed when you bend it. So feed the tube in from whichever end, the wire in to the tube rather, from whichever end you prefer. I've done it from the lamp fitting end. Hopefully it will come out. Let's try it from the other end because it's uneven, it's not so good. So we'll try it from the other end. There we go. So just feed it through until you get a decent length out the other end. Just keep coming. Just feed it in little bit by bit. And there we go. There we've got the end out, and we should be able to pull it through. So there we have the wire out the end and out the other end. Don't worry about how much is out this end at the moment, because once it's bent you can pull it back. Okay, so we have our lamp fitting on our 0.8mm tubing, and we've fed the wire through. We've got a little bit at the end and we've stripped the end. Now we're going to form the head, form the swan neck, and you can use whatever suits you to do it. I mean, I sometimes use my solder sucker, I use the end of a gas burner, but more usually I use the fitting, the drill bit holder out of a drill set. So with the operating valve at the front, gently bend it round your chosen former in a nice even movement. Make sure that it's vertical. So there we have, it's not too bad. And then all you've got to do is form the bottom. So however far down you fancy it, just do the same thing again. So bend it gently round the former so you get the curve at the bottom, and then the idea is to get this bit of the tube directly below the light fitting. So just bend it back. have your top. Right, so the next thing to do is to take the wire, and you need a reasonable length, obviously depending on where your convenient electrical connections are, from where you're going to connect it up to the power. So just cut the wire off at the end, don't worry about it. So now you've got something that's manageable. And what we're going to do now, we're just going to check that it's all aligned, so it's all neatly aligned, and then we're going to put this into the 1.5mm tube that you prepared earlier, if I can find it. There it is. So again, feed the wire through the top. So that's not too bad. The great thing about annealing it is that you can adjust it to a certain extent by hand. So what we're going to do is we're going to solder the 0.8 to the 1.5mm tubing. So again, just your usual, whatever you use, low melt is best. It's quite feasible to solder with the wire inside the tube. If you get the correct wire, it is surprisingly heat resistant. So we'll just do that. I've got a little bit of 145 here. Just so that it doesn't spin around. There you go. So there is your basic light fitting with the strengthening bit in. I've prepared an LED, or partially prepared an LED, but of course now, because it is so small, I can't actually see where I put it. So just bear with me while I find it. Right. So as I mentioned, I've used these very small LEDs to do this, and what I've done is I've soldered a wire to what will be the negative. I won't bother showing you, but you have to take it on faith that on the rear of the LED there is a green triangle, and that represents the symbol for an LED. So the current flows in the direction that the arrow is pointing. So the point of the arrow is the return. So there's a little bit of wire soldered onto that, and now I'm going to solder this onto the wire that I've put through the post. So I'll go do that and show you what I've done. Okay, so what we've done, we've bent the post, we've lined it up a bit by hand. We can do that a little bit more. The light fitting should be over the post, but it's near us, makes no difference. We've lined it up so that it's relatively in line that way. We've soldered the LED in, so we've put the wire that we attach to the negative terminal through the hole at the back. Used a little bit of white metal solder to make the connection, and we've soldered the LED to the blue lead. So we will now just give it a quick test. I use my bench supply, which will be set for 3 volts. So the post is return, and the wire is positive, and you should be able to see that it is lit despite the sunshine from outside. So that bit's ready for the moment. Now the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to put the operating wires on the diagonal, which you may be able to see. I'll put the operating wires on there, and then when that's done I'll feed it through, and then I'll talk to you about how we do the shade, but I won't fit the shade until it's after it's painted, and it won't be painted for this video. So I'll go away, I'll do the operating wires, and then I'll talk to you about the lampshade, the covering, and I'll show you it fitted in the post and secured, and we'll put the return wire on the bottom. Okay, I'll go away and do that, and I'll come back when I've done that. Okay, so there we have it. The operating wires were made out of some of this wire stripped, and I wrapped it round an offcut of 1.5mm tube. Just wrap it around a couple of times and then roll it up, cut the surplus off, and then soldered it on to the operating. The return wire is soldered on the bottom. That should fit nicely through a decent sized hole in the baseboard. The only thing that I should tell you that you need to take into account is when you put the post on, there are two small holes on either side, and they're for the ladder rest. You can fit them or leave them off, it's entirely up to you, but I'll probably fit them later. I won't do it for this program. With regards the bowl that goes underneath, I've found that the easiest way to do this is to use a very sharp scalpel to cut round it as near as you can get it to where the flat bit starts to become the dome. Then rub it on very fine emery paper or glass paper or whatever, like I normally do in all my other videos. I use one of my wife's nail files, and then you can either stick it on, don't stick it on with super glue, stick it on with either GS Hypo like I used earlier, or canopy glue, and leave it to go off well. Now I hope you've enjoyed this brief demonstration on how I build lamps, and by all means give it a go. Thank you for watching.